Cool. So this is our very first ECD Conversations series, and today we've got James Roberts with us. He's the Chief Digital Officer for Wellington City Council. We thought it would be an excellent first guest for this conversation series to talk about the impact that looking at emotions in the workplace and working with the DEC has had on his leadership and his team. So welcome, James.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I work at Wellington City Council. I've been there for about 4 years, and it's the first job that I've had that has been in the public sector. So the majority of, you can probably tell I'm not 21. The majority of my career, decades of it, in fact, I've been working in private sector organisations, mainly around technology and mainly around banking, telecommunications, and basically technology sales and software development. So that's kind of my background.
And so what has prompted you to start working? It'd be really good to kind of find out a bit about what prompted you to start working with the Emotional Culture Deck and what that's looked like over the time that we've been using it. So what prompted you to explore emotions at work? I mean, it's not something that is automatically people look at, particularly if they're in the role of a Chief Digital Officer. So love to hear a little bit about that and the journey that you've been on so far.
Sure. Well, I guess my interest probably started quite a long time ago, way back in the 90s, when I did an MBA at Victoria University, and I can remember in the organisational behaviour courses and also the strategy courses on that, this focus on the human in the workplace and the move away from that kind of old school Frederick scientific management method, which was somewhat dehumanizing, and a move much more towards a much more human-centric workplace and workplace culture. And there was a lot of, management thinking emerging around the time about how we could achieve that. So that's kind of like what originally tweaked my interest. I then actually had I worked with a couple of buddies. We did a startup software company, which ended up being quite successful and grew. And it was an opportunity to kind of try doing things differently from what I'd experienced myself in the workplace. And so it was a great opportunity to start bringing some of those ideas in. And so I guess I had a background from then of seeing how that different, human-centered, human-oriented thinking and culture focus could have a real impact on a business and people, and how they enjoyed working in a business. And while there is a vaguely kind of capitalist outcome from that, and that you do get, increased productivity, etc., it's really about seeing people having a smile on their face and enjoying their work and wanting to be there, and that then I think flowing through to what they do outside of work as well, and how they relate to people outside of work. So for me, that's a really important value. And when I started getting an understanding of the Emotional Culture Deck, I saw that as a really interesting, very powerful, very simple, very adaptable and accessible method of influencing culture to be very human-centric.
And so when did you start? I mean, I know some of this, but for people listening, they don't. But when did you start working with the Emotional Culture Deck and sort of bringing more of an emphasis on, emotions at work? What does that look like, over the time? So just be good to kind of share a little bit about your journey so far and how you've worked with it.
Sure. So I think I mentioned earlier on that when I first started at council 4 years ago, I was involved in a transformation program. Mm-hmm. My experience with transformation programs is mixed, as in, how often they actually achieve what they aspire to achieve, because they're so complex and there's so many different moving parts. And in essence, I don't think that we were at council at the time, we were on track to achieve what we aspired to from that program. So we really had to kind of stop and re-gear and rethink. Yeah. And as part of that, we did some organizational change as well. And that's when I kind of moved into the role that I'm in now, managing that large group of people. And so what happened really was a whole bunch of disparate functions came together and needed to operate in quite a different and transformed way. And so as part of that, it was almost like kind of stripping down a little bit of the old and recreating a new environment and way of working and culture that we wanted to operate. At the same time, and kind of in parallel with that, my current boss, Barbara McKerrow, who's the CEO, moved into her role, and she had a very strong focus on improving the culture and the performance of the organization and making it a great place to work as well. So I got a lot of autonomy and guidance in an autonomous way, and support from Barbara to really work hard on the culture, and also from Meredith Blackler, who's our Director of People and Culture as well, to really work on the culture. And they gave me a lot of space to try a lot of different things. And I knew that that yourself, Lottie, had come across the emotional culture deck. We talked about it, and as I said before, it just seemed like a very simple and effective but yet powerful way of influencing culture. And so I think it was towards the end of 2019, in November 2019, we did the first set of facilitated sessions with what was all the people leaders who work for me, of which there was approximately 20 plus. Right. And we did that, and we got some really good stuff from that. I mean, I think everyone who participated in that got a lot of benefit out of it. If nothing else, it cemented the fact that that was important. You know, the human-centric place was important for us, and that we felt that building the culture was an important thing to do, and we wanted to emphasize that as a priority. And it kind of got everyone on the page there, which was really good. And then there were some actual direct benefits that came from it as well. So, yeah, so I think there's an initial uncomfortableness with some people bringing up the subject of, we're going to talk about how we feel.
Which makes sense, right? It's so counterintuitive. It shouldn't be, but it is.
Probably particularly my generation, right? Yeah, there's an uncomfortableness. There's maybe an element of distrust, you know, and I think that's really important as well, because I think it goes hand in hand with trust, right? Like being able to speak and talk about our feelings and how that can actually influence a positive growth trajectory on your culture goes hand in hand with building trust. I think you've got to have both, right? And
psychological safety is that foundation for the trust as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some of the new folks, etc., a little bit wary. You know, some of the things that people have said to me when they've come into, I don't think it's just particularly my team, I think it's council in general, is they're quite surprised at the work culture at council, and surprised as in surprised delighted, like it's better than they thought it was going to be, because it is something that, you know, Barbara, Meredith and myself, etc., and all the other executive team have really focused on. But yeah, there's an element of new people coming in. They're like, oh, I'm still kind of getting used to this. I'm not 100% sure. There's that little bit of like, oh, I don't generally talk about feelings. But the great thing about the ECD, because it's so simple and it's kind of slightly gamifying, you quickly hook people in because it's so easy to use. And the weirdest thing is you go, okay, pick a card. Okay, so tell me about it. Why did you pick that one? And suddenly people are talking, and they don't even realize they're talking about their feelings, which is stuff they wouldn't normally have talked about, right? And so suddenly you break through those silly little barriers of feeling uncomfortable or whatever, and you're having the conversations, and then, you know, it just kind of goes from there and strengthens from there.
So what have you noticed? I'm really keen to hear what you've noticed in terms of using it for yourself. Like, what have you noticed about yourself, and then what have you noticed in your team? Because again, you know, coming back to that expectations in workshops, we like instant results, don't we? And we like them to be something really tangible that we can hold in our hands. But the interesting thing about culture is it is more of an experience. It is about how you feel. So what have you noticed in terms of yourself working with emotions at work, and also your team?
Sure. So what I'll say has definitely been influenced by you know, working with the emotional culture deck, etc. But there's probably also a little bit of influence from the kind of broader mindfulness activities that I've done that you know you've helped with and kind of spearheaded. But what I find is that identifying the feeling and then translating that into what that means in terms of behavior. So I'm feeling this, therefore I'm behaving that way, and seeing those linkages more clearly and thinking about those things more clearly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what is the
And
emotion telling me? Why is it here? Yeah.
yes, exactly. And then also recognizing, because you're recognizing the behaviors that are in essence being triggered by these feelings, you start to think about you start to kind of abstract yourself from the behaviors, see what the behavior is doing and how it's affecting you and other people. And if I go into a meeting room and I'm feeling a bit angry or frustrated about something, I know that my behaviors will show that. And people won't know that that's just something that's happened to me elsewhere. They'll think it's to do with them, right? And so by kind of doing this work, I've started to see these things more clearly and the impacts that they have. And then through, especially with some of the mindfulness stuff, being able to kind of manage that a bit more carefully. And therefore, kind of like, it's not being in control of your feelings so much. It's more like understanding where they're coming from, understanding how to manage them, and particularly when you're working with other people, how to do that with other people so that you're not causing kind of friction, etc.
Yeah. And in your teams, what have you noticed? Like, it's been really great to hear. I know I've heard some of the stories of some of the ways, that they're using it and what they're noticing. Like, but what are you noticing in the people that you're working with, in the leaders that work for you and their teams, and just the general atmosphere and culture around the place?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're having conversations about emotional culture, which we never would have had. I mean, we just literally would never, even if you say, hey, everyone read this HBR article about emotional culture, like you'd never actually get to that point, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that people are, involved in these workshops, with you, that they're responding to that, they're taking it away, they're thinking about it, and then they're actually putting it into some of their everyday practices, means that first and foremost, it becomes part of the conversation that we're having, which is a real change from where things were before. And especially with people who, would come across as quite introverted, maybe quite technical, hearing those people get engaged in it is really, I mean, it's like almost seeing a different person sometimes when you see them or have a conversation with them, because they're talking in a different way than they have before and you ever would have expected them to.
Maybe they're just talking.
Yeah, well, maybe, right? Most likely, right? Yeah. But I think it's because people can see that when you actually use the deck and you have these discussions and you apply it to different situations, well, I would definitely advocate using it, most certainly. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, there are a lot of different kind of organizational behavior and management development and leadership methodologies and practices and things that you can do, and we've all done loads and loads of them. But this one is it's incredibly effective and powerful in the change it can influence, and it's so easy to use and so accessible. And because of that kind of little bit of gamification around the card deck, etc., people are very open to it. So I think it has to be one of the first choices, I reckon, if you're thinking about culture development. How do we better develop the people, the working environment, make it a great place to work, etc. For me, it would be, probably top of the list in terms of techniques to use. So I definitely encourage anyone to use it, and more than happy to speak to anyone as well if they want to come and have a chat about our experiences. More than happy to.